Everything I've built will one day belong to my only daughter. My father smiled beneath the ballroom lights and rested one hand on my stepsister's shoulder. Applause rolled across the room. I sat at the back table, exactly where someone had moved my place card less than an hour earlier. My name was Natalie Bennett. I was 31 years old, and the man standing on that stage had raised me until he remarried and slowly decided I no longer fit the family image he wanted the world to see. Beside him, my stepsister looked radiant in a silver gown. My father's wife lifted her glass proudly. Donors, reporters, city officials, and business leaders stood to applaud the devoted father and philanthropist. Then my father looked directly at me. For half a second, I thought he might correct himself. He didn't. Instead, he smiled wider. So I stood. "Dad," I said, loud enough for the microphone to catch my voice. "May I ask you one question?" The applause faded. He gave a small, indulgent laugh as though I were a child interrupting an adult conversation. "Of course, Natalie." He still didn't call me his daughter. That was when I knew I had been invited for a reason. He wanted me there to witness my own erasure. The gala had been advertised as a celebration of family, service, and legacy. My father's foundation was honoring my stepsister for her community work, and every detail had been designed to reinforce the image he had spent years building. When I arrived, a volunteer had checked the seating chart and frowned. "You're listed at the family table," she said. Before she could guide me forward, my father's wife appeared. "There's been a change," she said smoothly. "Natalie will be more comfortable near the back." My father stood several feet away speaking with a state senator. He heard her. He said nothing. For the next hour, I watched him introduce his wife and stepsister to everyone who mattered. "This is my family. My girls. My greatest pride." Each time he passed me, his eyes moved over me like I was another guest. Years earlier, I would have confronted him in private. I would have asked what I had done wrong and listened while he explained that his new family needed stability. I had spent birthdays waiting for calls that never came. At my law school graduation, he left before my name was announced because my stepsister had a rehearsal. When old family photographs appeared in foundation brochures, I was cropped out. Still, I said nothing. I believed patience might someday make him remember that I had been his daughter before he became Richard Bennett, celebrated philanthropist. Then he stood beneath a banner bearing the foundation's name and declared that everything he had built belonged to his only daughter. My stepsister turned toward me, her expression changing. My father spread his hands. "Well," he asked, "what's your question?" I met his eyes. "If she's your only daughter," I said, "whose inheritance funded this foundation?" The entire ballroom went silent. The silence didn't last long. A few uneasy chuckles rippled through the ballroom as guests looked from my father to me, assuming I'd made an awkward joke. My father was the first to recover. He laughed softly into the microphone. "Natalie," he said, shaking his head, "this really isn't the time." His tone was calm, almost fatherly. It was the same voice he'd used my entire life whenever he wanted to make me sound unreasonable without ever raising his own. Several guests nodded, believing I'd simply chosen the worst possible moment to air a family grievance. I didn't move. "I agree," I replied evenly. "That's why I'm only asking one question." His smile tightened. "We can discuss private family matters another day." "This isn't private," I said. "You made it public the moment you told this room you have only one daughter." A murmur spread through the audience. My father's wife, Evelyn, shot to her feet. "Natalie, stop embarrassing everyone." I turned towards her. "I'm not embarrassing anyone. I'm asking my father to explain something he just said." She folded her arms. "You've always been dramatic." Before I could answer, my stepsister, Claire, looked between us in confusion. "Wait," she said quietly. "Natalie, what do you mean?" Her voice didn't carry anger, only uncertainty. For the first time all evening, I realized she genuinely hadn't expected this. She looked at my father. "Dad." He didn't answer her. Instead, he looked directly at me. "I invited you here because I thought we had moved beyond this." I almost smiled. Moved beyond what? Being ignored? Being erased? Being treated like an inconvenience every time his new family was around? No. I'd simply stopped arguing. There was a difference. I lowered my voice. I spent years believing silence would make you love me again. The ballroom grew even quieter. I never criticized you publicly. I never challenged your decisions. I never told anyone how often you forgot my birthday. I never mentioned that you skipped my law school graduation after staying just long enough to take a family photo without me. Several people in the front row slowly turned toward my father. His confident posture began to stiffen. He reached for the glass of water beside the podium. "Natalie," he warned, "that's enough." "No," I answered calmly. "Not yet." I looked across the room. There are people here who have known me since I was a little girl. A retired judge lowered his eyes. A longtime donor frowned. An elderly couple whispered to each other. They remembered. They had attended birthday parties before my parents divorced. They had seen photographs with just me and my father years before Evelyn entered our lives. This wasn't news to them. It was a memory they had quietly watched disappear. My father cleared his throat. "Our family has evolved." The words landed heavily. Evolved, as though I had become an outdated version of his life. "As families do," he continued. "Sometimes relationships become," he searched for the word, "complicated." I nodded slowly. "They do." Then I asked, "Does complicated mean pretending your first child never existed?" The question hit harder than I'd intended. No one applauded. No one spoke. Claire stared at my father. "Dad," she whispered. I didn't know she felt like this. He looked at her instead of me. "You don't need to concern yourself with this." "But I do," she replied. My father immediately turned back toward the audience. "This gala is about helping families in need," he announced. "I'd appreciate it if we stayed focused on tonight's purpose." It almost worked. Almost. Then one of the foundation's board members slowly stood from the head table. It was Margaret Collins, the board's vice chair. A woman who had known my late mother long before the foundation even existed. She adjusted her glasses. "Richard," she said evenly, "before we continue." Another board member stood beside her. Then another. Margaret folded her hands. "I believe Ms. Bennett deserves an answer." The ballroom fell silent once again as every eye returned to my father. Richard Bennett had spent decades controlling every room he entered. This time the room stopped following him. Conversations died mid-sentence. Glasses were lowered onto tables. The soft music that had been playing through the ballroom suddenly felt out of place, and within seconds someone quietly muted it. My father looked toward the event coordinator stage. "We're going to continue with the program," he said firmly. "The auction begins in 5 minutes." No one moved. Margaret Collins remained standing. "So does the foundation's credibility," she replied. The sentence landed harder than anyone's applause had earlier that evening. Across the ballroom, several donors exchanged uneasy looks. A local television reporter quietly raised her phone, no longer recording the gala but recording the conversation instead. My father noticed. His jaw tightened. "Margaret," he said with a practiced smile, "this is neither the time nor the place for legal discussions." "It became the time and place," she answered calmly, "when you publicly represented your family in a way that may conflict with the foundation's own history." Another trustee, David Holloway, stood beside her. "I have the same concern." My father looked genuinely surprised. David had served beside him for nearly 15 years. He was one of the few people Richard trusted completely. "You too?" my father asked quietly. David nodded. "We owe the donors an accurate answer." A murmur swept through the audience. Some guests still believed this was simply a bitter family disagreement. Others were beginning to realize it might involve the foundation itself. I stepped forward just enough that everyone could hear me without raising my voice. "I'm not questioning who my father loves." Every head turned toward me. "If Richard Bennett wants to love Claire as his own daughter, that's his choice." Claire looked at me with visible relief. Then I continued. "I'm questioning the statement he just made." I turned toward the audience. "He didn't say Claire feels like my daughter. He didn't say Claire is the daughter who works most closely with the foundation. He said she is his only daughter." I let the words hang in the air. Those are not the same thing. The silence that followed was heavier than before. A woman seated near the front finally spoke. "I remember your mother." Several guests turned toward her. She introduced herself as one of the foundation's earliest donors. Elizabeth Bennet attended our first fundraising luncheon before the foundation even had an office. She looked directly at my father. She was incredibly proud of you. My father forced a polite smile. Elizabeth was a remarkable woman. I nodded. She was. Then I addressed the room. Many of you probably don't know how this foundation began. My father interrupted immediately. That's enough, Natalie. No, Margaret said firmly. Let her finish. For the first time all evening, my father wasn't controlling who spoke. I looked around the ballroom. The building you're sitting in wasn't purchased through business profits. Several people frowned. The land this headquarters stands on originally belonged to my mother's family. More whispers. The first major endowment that allowed this charity to exist wasn't created after a successful investment. I looked directly at my father. It came from assets my mother inherited and later transferred into trusts meant to secure our family's future. Claire's face drained of color. She looked at my father. Dad. He didn't answer. I continued calmly. Every annual report published by this foundation acknowledges its original endowment. Several guests immediately reached for their phones. I've read those reports. So have many of you. Within seconds, screens began lighting up across the ballroom. People searched the foundation's website, past annual reports, archived donor newsletters, financial summaries. A journalist quietly whispered to her cameraman, "Pull up the founding history." Another donor enlarged a PDF on his tablet. I found it. He frowned as he read. Founding assets donated through the Bennet Family Legacy Trust. Someone else asked, "What? Wasn't that Elizabeth Bennet's trust?" The questions spread from table to table. More phones appeared. More guests searched. My father's confident smile was gone. He glanced toward the foundation's communications director, silently hoping someone would interrupt. No one did. Instead, David Holloway opened one of the archived reports on his own tablet. He read silently for several seconds before slowly looking back at Richard. His expression had completely changed. Margaret stepped closer to the stage. "Richard." She spoke softly enough that everyone leaned forward to hear. "If these reports identify the Foundation's founding assets this way." She paused. "Are those reports legally accurate?" The question echoed through the ballroom. No one breathed. Every eye settled on my father, waiting for an answer he no longer seemed prepared to give. For several long seconds, my father said nothing. The silence was more damaging than any accusation I could have made. Around the ballroom, waitstaff stopped serving drinks. The auctioneer quietly stepped away from the podium. Even the photographers lowered their cameras, sensing that the story unfolding before them had become far bigger than a charity gala. Then my father cleared his throat. "I think this discussion has gone far enough." No one moved. He looked toward the event coordinator. "We're taking a short intermission." Again, no one moved. Margaret Collins folded her hands. "Richard, with respect, we can't proceed while there's uncertainty surrounding the Foundation's public representations." My father forced a smile. "There is no uncertainty." David Holloway held up the tablet displaying the archived annual report. "Then explain this." He turned the screen toward the other trustees. The page clearly described the Foundation's origins, stating that its initial endowment had been established through the Bennet Family Legacy Trust following Elizabeth Bennet's passing. Several trustees leaned in to read it for themselves. One slowly nodded. Another removed his glasses and read the paragraph a second time. There was no ambiguity. The Foundation itself had publicly acknowledged where its first assets came from. My father stepped away from the podium. "You're twisting my words." I met his eyes. "Am I?" He pointed toward Claire. "When I said my only daughter, I meant the daughter actively involved with the Foundation today." The explanation sounded rehearsed even as he said it. A ripple of disbelief spread through the audience. Margaret looked at him steadily. "Richard." She spoke carefully. "That is not what you said." David nodded. "I wrote your speech." The room became even quieter. "You approved every word yesterday." My father's shoulders stiffened. Another trustee added quietly, "I remember the exact sentence." A donor near the front table spoke up. "So do I." Within moments, voices rose from every corner of the ballroom. "He definitely said my only daughter." That's exactly what I heard. There was no other interpretation. My father looked around the room as though searching for anyone to support him. No one did. Beside him, Claire stood perfectly still. She looked from my father to me. Natalie. Her voice trembled. Can we talk? I nodded. She walked slowly across the stage until we stood only a few feet apart. I honestly didn't know. There wasn't a trace of defensiveness in her face. I knew Dad and you weren't close anymore. She swallowed hard. But I never knew why. I believed her. Over the years, my father had carefully controlled the narrative. To Claire, I had simply been the distant daughter who chose another life. She had never seen the birthdays he skipped, the graduations he left early, the holidays where my invitation mysteriously arrived after everyone else's plans were already made. She looked at me with tears gathering in her eyes. Did he really stop introducing you as his daughter? I gave a small nod. It didn't happen all at once. It happened a little every year. Claire turned slowly toward him. Dad. For the first time that evening, she didn't sound proud. She sounded hurt. Is that true? My father took a step toward her. I was trying to protect this family. Claire shook her head. You mean you were protecting your image? The sentence hit him harder than mine ever had. He opened his mouth to respond. Nothing came out. Margaret exchanged a look with the other trustees. Then she addressed the room. As vice chair of the board, I believe we have a fiduciary obligation to address these concerns immediately. One by one, the remaining trustees stood. No speeches, no arguments, just quiet agreement. Margaret looked directly at Richard. We're calling an emergency executive session tonight. A wave of whispers swept through the ballroom. Several major donors quietly informed foundation staff that they would postpone signing their pledge contributions until the board completed its review. Reporters moved closer to the stage, notebooks already open. Camera flashes lit the room. My father glanced toward the ballroom doors. For the first time in my life, he looked like a man who wanted to leave. He took one step toward the exit. Before he reached it, the chairman of the board, Harold Whitmore, entered from the adjoining conference room. Having been briefed moments earlier, he walked calmly to the microphone. Richard, my father stopped. Harold's voice carried across the silent ballroom. We cannot continue this gala until this matter has been formally addressed. Everything my father had planned for that evening had just come to a complete stop. No one applauded. The ballroom that had been filled with celebration less than 30 minutes earlier now felt more like a board hearing than a charity gala. Harold Whitmore looked at me. Natalie, he said calmly, you mentioned documentation. I did. I reached into my leather portfolio, something I had carried with me from the moment I accepted the invitation. I hadn't come hoping to embarrass my father. I had come knowing exactly what he was capable of. I walked to the center of the stage and handed Harold a neatly organized binder. There are 5 tabs, I said. Please start with the first. Harold nodded and opened it. The ballroom was so quiet that everyone could hear the turning of each page. Margaret Collins and David Holloway stepped beside him. The 3 of them read silently for nearly a minute. Then Margaret looked up. These are certified copies. Yes. Estate records. Yes. She continued reading. The first section contained my mother's will and the probate documents following her death. The second contained trust agreements created with the assistance of one of the state's largest estate law firms. The third contained property transfer records. The fourth contained the original incorporation documents for the Bennett Family Foundation. The fifth contained annual reports published by the foundation itself over the past 20 years. Every document told the same story. Harold slowly removed his glasses. Richard, his voice was steady. These records established that Elizabeth Bennett transferred substantial assets into trusts with the expectation that they would preserve both her family's future and the charitable work she and you envisioned together. My father remained silent. Harold continued. They also established that those assets became the financial foundation upon which this organization was built. Margaret turned another page. The incorporation documents specifically referenced the Bennett Family Legacy Trust. David looked toward my father. And every annual report since then has acknowledged the foundation's origins. He held up one of the reports. This isn't hidden information. It's our own published history. Several donors leaned forward. Harold nodded. The issue before us isn't ownership. He looked directly at my father. It's representation. Margaret closed the binder. Tonight, you publicly stated that Claire is your only daughter. She paused. Yet, the very organization you lead openly acknowledges a legacy that exists because of your first wife and the daughter she left behind. Every eye shifted toward my father. Finally, he spoke. I never intended for those words to be taken literally. I answered before anyone else could. It wasn't about inheritance. He looked at me. It wasn't about money. The room remained silent. It was about standing in a ballroom full of people who have known me since I was a child and pretending I never existed. For the first time that evening, my father's shoulders dropped. He didn't argue. He didn't deny it. He simply looked away. Claire quietly walked across the stage until she stood beside me. I owe you an apology. I turned toward her. You don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. Her voice cracked. I spent years believing Dad whenever he said you wanted nothing to do with us. She wiped away a tear. I never once asked what your side of the story was. I reached for her hand. You were told what he wanted you to believe. She nodded. I'm sorry. So am I. The ballroom watched in complete silence as the two women my father had spent years keeping apart stood together instead of against each other. One of the foundation's earliest donors slowly rose to his feet. I knew Elizabeth. His voice carried through the room. She would have been proud of you tonight. Another donor stood, then another. Soon, several longtime supporters crossed the ballroom toward me. One elderly woman embraced me. I always wondered why we stopped seeing you. A retired judge shook my hand. I should have asked questions years ago. I believed the image instead of looking for the truth. One by one, people who had quietly accepted my disappearance acknowledged it aloud. No dramatic speeches, just honest regret. Meanwhile, reporters surrounded members of the board rather than my father. Questions shifted away from the gala itself. Instead, they focused on governance, transparency, and accountability. Harold returned to the microphone. Effective immediately, the Board of Trustees is entering executive session. He looked toward Richard. Pending the outcome of an independent governance review, he paused. I move that Richard Bennett be suspended as chairman. Margaret raised her hand. I second the motion. One trustee after another voted. The decision was unanimous. No shouting, no celebration, just the quiet sound of a reputation collapsing under documented facts. Several major donors informed the board that their pledged contributions would remain on hold until new leadership was appointed. Others privately offered to support the foundation through the transition because they believed its mission deserved better than its current leadership. Within 48 hours, every local newspaper carried the same story. Not about a family dispute, about a respected charity confronting uncomfortable truths and transparency over loyalty. The independent review found no evidence that foundation funds had been stolen. Its charitable work had genuinely helped thousands of people. But the investigation concluded that Richard had repeatedly used the foundation to strengthen a carefully crafted public image built around being a devoted family man while deliberately erasing his biological daughter from that story. His suspension became permanent. He quietly resigned from every remaining leadership position over the following months. Without the foundation, without the speaking engagements, and without the public admiration he had spent decades cultivating, the image he valued most disappeared. His marriage also began to fracture under the constant scrutiny. The private choices he had defended for years were suddenly impossible to hide behind polished speeches and staged photographs. As for the foundation, the board invited me to help strengthen its governance policies and transparency procedures. I accepted, but only after making one condition clear. My mother's contribution should finally be acknowledged honestly. The board agreed immediately. At the next annual gala, a bronze plaque was unveiled in the entrance hall. It read, "Founded through the vision and legacy of Elizabeth Bennett, whose generosity created opportunities that continue to serve our community today." There were no missing names, no rewritten history. Months later, I attended that same gala again. This time, my seat wasn't hidden in the back. It was beside the board. Claire sat next to me. Over the months, we'd built something neither of us expected. Not because we suddenly became sisters overnight, but because we finally stopped letting one man's version of the past define our relationship. As guests arrived, Harold smiled. Ready? I looked around the ballroom. The atmosphere felt completely different. It wasn't built on appearances anymore. It was built on honesty. Across the room, I noticed my father sitting quietly among the general guests. No cameras followed him. No donors gathered around him. No one asked him to speak. For the first time in decades, he wasn't the center of the evening. He looked toward me. I gave him a polite nod, nothing more. I didn't need an apology anymore. The truth had already done what years of arguments never could. It gave me back my place, not in his life, but in my own. I didn't ask that question to embarrass my father. I asked it because the truth deserved to be introduced before he rewrote the family one last time.